Veritus is a top-down 2D action RPG clearly inspired by the Legend of Zelda titles of the Game Boy Color era. It incorporates a lot of the same elements and styles used in those titles while also bringing in aspects common in more recent games like cooking and crafting. It tells a story that requires you to uncover many secrets in order to unravel. But before we really dive into it, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would greatly appreciate it and it would help me to reach my current goal of 1,000 subscribers. Now, the first aspect of Veritus that I really want to talk about is the presentation, which consists of both the graphics and the sound and music. The graphics, which are a pixel art style reminiscent of the Game Boy Color era, are really nice to look at. Very detailed and colorful. Even the sides of the screen, which contains like your items and your health and magic and your gold, all that stuff, they do a really great job of utilizing what would normally be just wasted screen real estate. And then the pixel art, the main graphics are fine, like they're great. But what I really enjoyed were during the dialogue scenes when you're talking to other characters, there's these pixel portraits, I guess we can call them. They're really well animated and just really well drawn and just a treat to look at. The sound design is really nice. Everything sounds appropriate for the action it's trying to convey, whether you're swimming in waters or you're mining a type of ore or fighting an enemy. Everything has a really nice and visceral sound to it. And it makes combat a lot of fun when you're slamming around enemies. The music is also a highlight for Veritus, in that it's not a chiptune soundtrack like you would probably expect from a game like this. It's a real treat to listen to. Just listen to this. There's even some songs that have some lyrics to them, which also goes the same for some of the dialogue. There is a tiny bit of voice acting, I guess you can call it that. It's not really voice acting, but there is some voices in the game. A big part of the gameplay is the combat, which again, this is in the 2D Zelda style, so it plays very similar to that. But the main difference here is that you have the ability to sprint. And this is the main way that you are going to dodge enemy attacks. And you really need to get used to this and make sure that you are sprinting around when you have projectiles and enemies coming at you. Because there's times where there's a lot of enemies on screen or during boss fights. Like, it's crucial that you get comfortable with sprinting around to dodge, because you do not have a shield. You do not have any way to deflect or block projectiles, and as a result, if you're not moving around, you're going to take a lot of damage really fast. There's a lot of variety to the different enemy types. Which area you're in depends on which type of enemies you're going to combat. There's projectile enemies and melee enemies. Some are fast, some are slow. Tons of variety with the enemy design, and it makes combat pretty enjoyable throughout the entire part of the game. The other part of this is the boss fights, which there are quite a few of, and I'm thrilled to tell you that this is probably, for me at least, the highlight of the entire game. The entire game. Like, I enjoyed every single boss fight. Now, granted, I felt like the final boss was pretty difficult, which we'll touch on the difficulty in a moment, but still enjoyable to really learn their attack patterns and get it down so that I can minimize the damage I'm taking. Made it really rewarding to finally roll the end game credits. As you play through the game, you'll consistently have a hub area that you revisit, which has a bunch of different NPCs you can interact with. There's a room you can go to, and I'm not really entirely sure how you unlock them, but there's different color palettes that are basically like your outfits, so you can swap the way your character looks. It's not really a shop, but there's an NPC you can interact with that has like a huge bag, and you can spend gold to get random materials, which is a huge part of the crafting system. And there's also an NPC that you can craft with, and you need different materials to craft different items. The game will tell you when you get a new recipe, like how to craft something, and you can also kind of just wing it and try and figure out recipes. And that goes for the crafting and the cooking. There's an NPC that allows you to cook. Both of these things require 3 different materials to create an item, whether that's cooking or crafting. But the downside is that you don't have a recipe book. You don't have any way of really knowing how strong something is when it comes to your items. So if you craft a really good pickaxe, for example, and say you have no idea you crafted a good pickaxe, and then you craft another pickaxe, it will replace the one that you were using. So in order to get it back, you would have to craft it again. This game really does lack like a proper inventory system where if you craft something, it should store in your inventory and you should be able to see, like, I don't know, say there's 5 or 6 different melee pickaxes. You should be able to switch to any one that you have crafted at that point. And I just really don't like the way they incorporated the crafting and the cooking here. And that's my main complaint so far, is that both of these systems I really didn't engage with very often. I crafted a new set of boots and a pickaxe, which I think was pretty decent. And then I didn't do anything else with it because I was afraid that I was going to end up crafting something worse than what I was using. So it doesn't feel rewarding to me to craft at all. And since it's such a huge part of the game, you're constantly finding materials, enemies are dropping them, there's always secret chests and little hidden things and quests and stuff you can do to get rarer materials. There's obviously the bag NPC that you can buy random materials from. This whole part of the game was like a huge miss for me. And it's a huge part of the game, so it wasn't like a deal breaker. It's not like it completely ruined the game for me. But the fact that it was there, it was actually like worse than if you had just had like standard progression where maybe over the course of the dungeons that you just earned a new pickaxe, like typical Zelda style, like you get better stuff as you play. Here they went for the crafting system. I didn't care for it. I just didn't like it. Other than that, there's also other items you'll acquire, like there's this teleportation move you'll have, which you need to solve some puzzles. There's a bracelet. You have like this rope, which serves as it's basically a Zelda hook shot. You can hook to enemies. You can clear gaps with it by lassoing like these poles that'll fling you across the way. There's health upgrades. Basically, there's these heart ores that you can mine, and 4 of them will give you a new green crystal, which the green crystals on the right side of the screen denote your health. And the thing I haven't mentioned yet is the story. Now, when it comes to story, I'm not the type of person that usually gets really like enthralled and engrossed into a game's narrative, and I admit that. Here in Veritus, there is a very complex story. There's tons of journals you can find that you can read, and it'll give you additional information. Talking to the NPCs will constantly give you new information. At the end of every dungeon, there's a scene with dialogue. You're consistently being told tidbits of the story throughout the entire game, but I'm going to be honest, I don't know what the hell was going on with the story. Like, I kind of got the gist of it. Didn't really care, though. It was there. I don't really have an opinion on it, so I'm just going to move past it. It seemed kind of convoluted to me. Overly complex with the way it was presented. And that's kind of weird to say because it's a pixel game. But anyways, now let's talk about kind of the structure of the game. There's a lot of people that just really enjoy dungeons in Zelda. Really enjoy the dungeons. And if you are that type of player, I have good news for you. This entire game is basically a dungeon. There's no overworld whatsoever. The hub area connects all the dungeons, and that's the gist of it. So you don't ever have to worry about traversing an overworld and backtracking through the overworld. You can just consistently progress through the game and just go through the dungeons, which is pretty much how I played. And my end screen showed me that I missed a lot of secrets and things, a lot of quests and secrets, but because you're constantly going dungeon to dungeon, it's easy to overlook these things. So that's the main way the game handles its progression, is going through these dungeons, and then the hub area, and then a dungeon, and then a hub area, etc. So if you don't like the overworld aspect, and you just really love dungeons in Zelda, you're going to love this game, because the entire game is just a series of dungeons. Now, I briefly mentioned the difficulty, and I will say that this game is pretty difficult. I wouldn't necessarily say it's unfair or too difficult, but if you don't like a challenge, you're probably going to get frustrated with this and then not come back to it, because it does get pretty difficult. But it does handle its difficulty in a very fair manner, in that if you die, it does revert you to your previous save point, but you keep the progress that you made. You might lose some items you were using, like if you cooked a meal or something like that, but you do keep the progress that you made. The last thing I want to mention before I wrap this up are bugs and issues that I had. Now, I ran into a bunch of small bugs. I was not recording video the entire time I was playing, so a bunch of these I don't have footage of. There was one time where I got hit on the edge of the screen and I just kept going back and forth, left and right between the two screens. I had instances where the screen was telling me I had no keys, but I did have keys and I was able to open locked areas with the keys that it said I didn't have. Now, these are just a few things. I'm not going to nitpick the game because the developers are a small team and they've been pretty good about patching the game. Over the course of the few days I was playing this, I had numerous patches. And it's been a few days since I've played it last, and there's been more patches. So I don't doubt that they're probably going to fix all the known issues, and you probably won't really run into any of the things that I did. So with that said, let's just move on. So in conclusion, I did enjoy the time I spent playing Veritus, but it did have some things about it that I just didn't enjoy, or I felt like they could have done better if they hadn't stuck so closely to what felt like arbitrary restrictions on their core systems. Why don't you have a proper inventory screen so that when you craft new equipment, you can switch freely between it? You have 2 screens of inventory for all your materials, but you don't have a proper inventory system for the items that actually matter. That kind of baffles me. Why is there no way to see unlocked recipes for both cooking and crafting? Things like that, while not a huge deal, were pretty annoying aspects to the game. I can easily recommend Veritus if you like this style of game and enjoy a challenge, because this is definitely the most difficult game I've ever played in this style. The puzzles and levels are thoughtfully designed and enjoyable throughout the entirety of the game, and I thought the boss fights were absolutely top-notch. I wouldn't recommend Veritus, however, if you feel like any of the less than stellar aspects would completely ruin your experience, or if you can't handle a challenge, since this is a game that presents one for sure. In the 4 hours I spent playing through Veritus to the end, I died a total of 31 times. I would consider that on the high end, so be prepared for the challenge if you decide to play this. A special thanks to the developer for the review copy so that I can create this review on the game. I appreciate you watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like, subscribe if you haven't done so already, and also let me know in the comments if you plan on picking this up, or if you have any questions, and I'll be sure to get back to you. But until next time, have a good one.